Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online video with me, Sherman. So just to give you guys a heads up on what's been going on, I've been sick. I had a sinus infection. It got into my lungs. It was really bad. But I'm feeling a lot better now. And so I'm back. And as the title says, and it does say that, it says, why the meta and the Trinity are hurting ESO. Now, understand this, guys. I'm not blaming the Trinity or the meta for ruining the game, but it is hurting the game. In some aspects, it is. And here's why. Not everyone likes to play the meta. The reason not a lot of people like to play the meta is because there is no options in the meta. There isn't. You're literally stuck with two tank classes, or two tank builds, and those two tank builds are identical in almost every respect. You're limited to your choice of healer to 1, and your DPS can be anything, but you're still limited to a select amount to be the best. This is why the meta doesn't work for everybody. The other reason why the meta doesn't work for everybody is because, one, it just doesn't offer variety. If it offered more variety, more people would be using the meta. But not a lot of people do, because nobody's tried to make anything outside the meta work within the game's design, or within the game. And it's not just a problem in-game. It's a problem on the forums, it's a problem on the web, it's a problem everywhere you go and you research this game. You'll find that a lot of people reference the meta a lot as being one of the major downfalls of ESO. Because it, like I said, it doesn't offer the variety. And it's not because of the game's design that it doesn't. It's because of the community's efforts to allow or to want more than that. See, a lot of it comes down to this. People will take the path of least resistance every time to get the best results. Instead of having some resistance there, they don't want there to be any. They want there to always be perfection, and perfection doesn't work because of Elder Scrolls' Trinity system. Now, their Trinity system isn't what's ruining the game. It's the meta Trinity that's not ruining the game. It's hurting the game. It's the meta Trinity is hurting the game because it doesn't allow the amount of diversity the game truly has to be utilized. See, when the developers say you can play this game how you want, they're not exactly telling the truth, and they're not lying. You can play how you want. You just have to play it by the rules of the game's design. And the game has 3 types of playstyles: Magicka, Health, and Stamina. Now, a person that builds a character for Magicka is most likely going to be a DPS or a healer. The people who play for Stamina could be a tank or a healer. Somebody who builds for Magicka might be a tank as well. Somebody who builds for health or a high health build is most likely going to be a tank. They're not going to be a DPS. And so you have these 3 stat options to build into. Now, because of this, it limits your play styles to only those. You can't hybridize your character by the degree that we would like the classic games. You can play a hybrid character, and you can play in all content of the game, including trials and dungeons, but a lot of people don't like that because you don't bring what they want to the table. You don't bring the maximum DPS. And that's what a lot of people are looking for in the meta. Not in the game itself, but in the meta. A lot of times people in the game itself are looking for the higher DPS because they want to get the content done fast. And the reason they want to get it done fast is because they're limited on time. They're limited on their play. So these people who have like 4 or 5 hours a day to play want to get as much stuff done as possible. A lot of people jump in, they do their daily dungeons, which takes 30 minutes roughly for each dungeon. Even with a non-meta group, it can take 30 minutes or less. But the less time means the more time they can do other things. So they don't like that. And sometimes that's what people spend most of their day doing, is playing nothing but dungeons because they have multiple characters they're playing through those dungeons. But there's another issue on top of that. Because of the meta, we see this issue with a lot of games. More people play DPS than they do tanks or healers. That's not because of the meta, that's because of the game itself. A lot of people see the negative side more than they see the positive. They see the positive as being the more damage I do, the faster I get done with content. The faster I can complete my quests, get done and get max level and all that kind of stuff. But they see with a tank, they can't do that. They can't speed through the content. It takes time. And unless you have a lot of patience, which a lot of people don't, including myself, you don't have the time to waste playing a slow progression. You want fast progression. You want decent progression. You want it to be like everyone else. Tanks and healers don't have that. So unless you have the patience to play that, it really sucks. So it leaves a lot of people going, well, I can't play the game as a tank or healer. I want to play DPS because I want to get the content done. I want to be able to experience it, and I want to have fun doing it. DPS becomes the mainstay for a lot of people because of that one factor. Tanks are slow as molasses when leveling. Same with healers. Or so they assume. In Elder Scrolls, because of the game's design and their trinity system, it actually allows for a greater diverse system and allows people to play as tanks in any armor type, or heal in any armor type, or play DPS in any armor type. It offers a variety of different play styles. But again, they're not meta. So people look down on anything that doesn't match the meta, especially if that's all they're shown online. Remember, a lot of the stuff you see on the internet, YouTube, forums, game sites for ESO or whatever, a lot of the builds they show are meta related. Not very many of them are outside the meta, and if they are, they're PvP related. They're not PvE. And that's because people take the path of least resistance. Again, that's the problem. People want the path of least resistance to get to their goal. Once they get to their goal, they've enjoyed their experience getting there, and if they're playing DPS, they're going to enjoy it a lot more because the content of the game is going to feel that much more exciting. Nobody wants to spend 20 minutes fighting an enemy. They want to spend 5 seconds. And it's not like it takes 20 minutes for a tank to kill something, it just takes a long time. It feels like 20 minutes sometimes. And that is a problem to a lot of players. That's why nobody plays the Trinity in this game. Is because, one, we were taught in other MMOs, especially a lot of us who played other MMOs, and came here from other MMOs, we were trained that the meta worked this way. Anyone who came to this game from Elder Scrolls is trying to play this game as an Elder Scrolls game. But it's an Elder Scrolls game in an MMO space. So you have to treat it that way. You have to treat it like it's an MMO, but you have to play it like an Elder Scrolls game. Because that's what it is. And it creates a lot of confusion for people. A lot of people don't get that grasp, and they don't understand the idea of the meta, and they don't understand the idea of non-meta, because you have those two demographics. And those are really the only two demographics we really have in the game. Yes, we have people who play different aspects of the game in different ways. We have RPers, we have, people who don't play any dungeons or trials and this and that. But you have two demographics mainly. People who play the meta and those who don't. And right now the scale is not balancing out too well, because if it was, we would see more people playing, builds that were good, not just meta builds, but were good builds, and it would kind of balance out the scales more. But we're not seeing that. We're actually seeing more and more people go to the meta side because it offers the best option, especially when it comes to DPS. When you see people soloing dungeons with a DPS build, or soloing a raid with a DPS build, you want to be that good. And that's another reason why the meta doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody has the skill to play the DPS build the way it's designed. Nobody has the skill to master weaving those animation cancels and those light attacks and those heavy attacks, not because they're not good enough. They just can't get the rotation down because they're just not capable of it. It's not that they're not good players, they're just not capable of reaching that degree of play style. It's not that they're not skilled or they're poor players or anything like that. It's just they don't have the ability to do it. I have a friend who has 3 fingers on one hand. He was born with 3 fingers on one hand. He has no thumb, and he plays Elder Scrolls. He uses his 3 fingers to move. He uses his mouse for everything else. He has all his buttons for his abilities programmed to his mouse. But he's a really good player. He's just doesn't have the capabilities to pull off the animation cancel rotations that a lot of the builds require. And this has made it really hard for him to be able to do trials and dungeons. It's literally stopped him. Because nobody will allow him to play with them because he doesn't pull the kind of DPS they want. He can pull 24K pretty good, 28K if he's having a really good day, but that's about it. And to a lot of people, that's not enough. So it's been really hard for him to really enjoy the game. So he hasn't been playing Elder Scrolls much lately. He's been playing Destiny 2. And then I have another friend who plays the game, but he doesn't see the game in the same light as everyone else. He sees it from the same perspective I do, that the game does offer these diverse builds and these diverse mechanics. And he's joined trial guilds that allow him to join them, but as soon as they see that he's not playing to their desired approach, they get all mad with him because he's not mimicking their playstyle. And it makes me feel miserable that he can't enjoy the game the same way everyone else can. And it's because he sees the game in a different perspective. It's not that his builds aren't good, they're really good. It's just that he doesn't have the same kind of rotation a lot of people use, and that's because he can't do those. It's not necessarily he can't do those. He just doesn't have the skill or the hand-eye coordination to do it. He's a good player. I've ran dungeons with this guy countless times, and he is a damn good player. But he just doesn't have the capability. And this is where the meta throws a lot of people off. They see the difficulty of these rotations. And a lot of the times, people will see them and say, there's no way you can do this without a macro. And they're right. You can't. Because they're that complicated. And this throws a lot of people off from doing them. So this leaves a lot of people playing in groups and playing with people that, you know, it takes some time to complete the content. But I know people who have been running trials in this game since day one. And they're running builds well outside the meta. And they do fine. But again, it comes down to they get people in their guilds and stuff who want to start rushing things, so they start creating their builds more meta style, and they can pull it off, but they can't. So they wind up getting left out of content play because they're not meeting the standards of the rest of their guild that their guild wants. And then they wind up leaving the guild because they have no other option. This is why MMO communities have such bad reputations, is because we have this whole mindset. Everyone thinks that there's like these elitist players. They're not elitist players. A lot of them are really cool people and are willing to work with you, and they're willing to help you. The problem is that too many people have become so have this ideology or this thought process that the only way you can truly understand or play this game is by playing the meta. If you go post on the forums and ask for advice for, say, I'm looking for a good Stamsork tank build, 90% of your replies are going to refer you to the meta. None of them are going to refer you to a good idea to play as Stamsork or play a Sork tank build. They're not going to give you that option a lot of the time. And the ones that do are people who don't play within the meta. And then what happens is when they offer their idea, they start getting a ton of hate. And a ton, well, I wouldn't say it's hate, but it's more like ridicule for their idea of their build. And it just turns into this storm of bickering, and it's just annoying. It's really just childish bickering. And it's not even like adult bickering. Like, there's a difference between adults having a debate over something versus adults arguing like children over something. And you see this all the time. Even in society, you see people arguing over stuff all the time. Like me and my friend, my friend's a PS4 like fanatic. I used to be a PlayStation junkie. I wouldn't touch Xbox if you even paid me. But I've learned, I've become a better person and realized that the Xbox just offers me more. Even though it's not as good, it offers me more than what the PlayStation does. So I've switched. And that's because now I can actually utilize some of the games I have on my PC and play with my children on the Xbox, because I have games that are cross-platform. And I'm like, this is cool. I can play Minecraft with my kids? Hell yeah. This is awesome. And that's one of the features that really, like, again, sets it apart from these other games and everything, is that you have that ability to adapt. And a lot of times people can't adapt to meta versus non-meta, because when you play the meta, it's very bound. It's very restricted. And when you try to incorporate something outside of the gears, or the cogs, we'll say, it just doesn't match up, so you're kind of getting this overlapping gear thing, and it just doesn't work. And that can be a problem as well. But the reason why I say the Trinity is also the issue is because it's the meta Trinity that also creates a problem in the game. Because the game's diversity in its systems, in its design, allowing you to tank in any armor, or heal in any armor, or DPS in any armor, allows people to really kind of diversify their builds. But at the same time, you diversify your build, you get a lot of negative response to it, because it doesn't match the meta, and it doesn't match the meta Trinity. Like when I first started tanking in medium armor back in the day, I used to get a ton of flack for it. And it was funny, after I quit tanking in medium armor, now it was a thing for trials. I'm like, really, guys? Now you're doing it? And it's okay. But when I do it, it's wrong. It's the end of the world. And I wasn't running Alkosh or anything. I was actually running Night Mother's Gaze to offer the extra, physical penetration. And I kept getting this bad rep for it, and people were like, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. And it's just like when I used to tank with two-handed. I tanked with two-handed for a long time in this game, for literally almost a year, and never really got a lot of ridicule for it. A lot of people never even cared. There was times where I'd get request to kick this person in the game, and it'd be like, why are you trying to kick me? Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm doing my job, we're doing fine, I'm not holding this up. Why are you voting to kick me and stuff? And then finally, it clicked on me. Oh, it's because I'm not playing the meta. And literally, it does weigh on you. I'm not gonna lie, guys. It does weigh on me as a content provider to you guys, offering you guys new builds and new ideas and new ways to play the game. That does weigh on me, especially when I get a lot of negative replies from people. And there is a lot of replies people don't see because of the way I have my channel set up. My channel's set up for family friendly. So anything that comes across derogatory or negative, like, foul words, things like that come across my chat, it blocks the whole message. So a lot of my messages I have to review before I allow them to be posted. If there's a lot of cuss words in it, I won't post it. If there's like the S word or damn, or if there's a lot of F words or F bombs, as I like to call them, in there, yeah, it's not getting posted. I'm not gonna allow it through. And there's times where I get a lot of messages. I'll get like 16 messages in a video where people will just literally be trash talking me because my builds don't match up to the meta. And yeah, it does. Like I said, it weighs on you. But it doesn't stop me. In fact, it encourages me to push harder, to make more, and to make them more diverse and unique and separate from the meta. Because I know that there's people out there that like the builds. I get a lot of comments on it, on people asking me, can I play this with this race, or can I do this, or can I do this? Because people want to play something new. Did you guys know that the meta has been in this game for 3 years? That the main tank since the launch of this game in the meta has been the DK? Like, Templar tanking wasn't a thing until Deltia did it. Are you serious? And then it died off as soon as Deltia quit doing Templar tanks. Soon as Deltia quit doing a lot of different varieties, it died off. A lot of people have created a lot of really cool concepts and ideas and offered it to the community. And a lot of it gets shot down because it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't match the meta. And this creates a lot of conflict, it creates a lot of arguments and problems within the game. And this is what I'm talking about. This is why I keep saying that it's not that it's ruining the game. It's not killing ESO. You know, that there's a meta and there's this trinity that's... And I could even go and explain to you guys why the trinity is a failed system, but nobody would agree with me. The ones who would probably see my side in understanding of it, but you have to understand, I don't hate either of them. The trinity just doesn't, or the meta doesn't offer me anything I like. The trinity, on the other hand, I don't agree with it in a game like this. And that's because action combat doesn't need a trinity. It needs dynamics. And it's the one thing that we've been missing in a lot of MMOs for a long time is good dynamic combat. And that's what an action combat game is supposed to be. It's supposed to be dynamic. It's supposed to be active, reactive. It's not supposed to be something where you just taunt and hold. That's something that was designed because of the game's designs. Now, if you guys don't know about like Trinity design in the classic games and why it was developed that way, it was to mimic the classic role-playing games. Any of you ever play like Baldur's Gate or Dungeons and any of the classic Dungeons & Dragons games, Pool of Radiance, Silver Shards, any of those? Those games used a system where you would body block your opponents from getting to your cleric and your mage. And your mage and your healer were some of your highest damage dealers in the group. And they would fire from range to take out the enemies. If you had a ranger, they could do the same thing. They could shoot enemies at distance. So you had to use your other allies to body block. In other games like Final Fantasy and stuff, it was the way they had the system set up. You would have your dragoon, your paladin, your rogue up front, or your ninja up front, and in the back you would have your white mage and your black mage. And that's how the game was designed to work. Even in Final Fantasy VII later on, they did the same setup where you'd have your frontline people and then you'd have your backline people, and you would take on the encounters that way. Later on, when they did Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy 13 and 14, those games became more action orientated, and it kind of removed the element of that kind of Trinity play and allowed you for more free-form play with your characters, even though it was still a turn-based game. Other games have mimicked this kind of structure into MMOs, and they created the Trinity system to mimic that playstyle. So that way, the reason why taunt was invented was to create this sense of, hey, we need a way to keep the mobs from getting to those high damage dealing Magicka people, and those high damage dealing people, we need them to focus on somebody. So they created the taunt mechanic. The taunt mechanic is a great idea. Don't get me wrong, I love taunting. I think it's a superb idea, but it's kind of a cheesy gimmick at the same time. Now, the reason why the Trinity is a failed system is because of the lopsidedness of the Trinity. You still have more people playing DPS than you do tanks or healers, which creates a lopsidedness in your community, which means that if your guild is made up of, say, 90% DPS, 4% tanks, 6% healers, you don't have enough to go around. So your tank has to kind of work, your tanks have to work kind of double time to get like multiple group runs in, which means, and then the fact that most tanks in most games do like 20% of the damage of one DPS character. So if you have like, say, a rogue in World of Warcraft, they do like 16 million K DPS. That tank is doing like 4 million DPS. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes that kind of playstyle. They want more diverse combat. Elder Scrolls was designed to allow that kind of diverse combat. But then there's another problem. Every ounce of content in this game is tested against specifics. It's tested against everything in the design structure, it's tested against a lot of things. In the actual PTS or test environment for the players, it is tested against one thing, the meta. So they have to kind of tinker with the game to make it work within the meta design. Now, it doesn't mean that the meta is the end-all be-all. It just means that a lot of the content can feel geared towards the meta. And it sets a lot of people off because they see that and they're like, well, you know what? I just don't feel like I can do that. Like I'm good enough for that. Even when they get to the full potential of their character, they still don't feel that way because a lot of it comes to fear. And it's not like they're afraid, like, oh God. No, it's like they have this, it's just this, they don't want to deal with that kind of situation. They don't want to be the one that, if they make a mistake, they're blamed. So that's why tanks and healers are really, like, left out. And that's why the Trinity, again, creates a bad area of field for the players. Because the DPS can never truly be blamed. I mean, think about this. The only thing the DPS can be blamed for is their damage. And if they're not pulling the damage, it's not going to be a huge problem. Now, if like 5 DPS are not pulling their damage, then it's a big problem. But if 1 or 2 aren't really pulling their full potential, it's not going to make such a detrimental change in the group that it's going to like make everyone wipe. It might cause a problem, but it's not going to cause a wipe 90% of the time. But if the tank or healer make a mistake and it causes a wipe, that's where the problems come in. And a lot of people don't realize that that is still an issue even in MMOs today. The Trinity's not a bad idea. It's just it doesn't work in every game aspect. And it doesn't really work when you're trying to create a game that is really story driven. All Elder Scrolls games have been really story driven games. Even the dungeons and trials are story driven. And because of that intense story driven content that they put into their games, there's one thing that most players seem to forget. This is a role-playing game. This might be a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, but it's also an Elder Scrolls story-based game. And Elder Scrolls games have always been about allowing people to play how they want. And when you don't, when you create a stigma within the community with the meta like that's happened, and you create this idea that the only thing that works within that game's design is the meta, it creates kind of this drop off. You know, like people see the meta and they don't see anything else. There's like nothing there besides the meta because that's all they can find. That's the only information they find or are given. And when they see that, they see the negative in the game, they're like, oh, well, this game's really limiting. This is like worse than playing Terra. And Terra's horrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, Terra's a great game. It's an awesome game. But it's terrible at the same time because it's so limiting and restricting on your character. It's like playing WildStar. WildStar's a great game, but it limits your character down to one weapon type only and one armor type only. And your character will all characters wind up looking the same at max level in the top gear. And it's like, wow, like you really want me to just play this really basic generic looking thing and not give me any diversity, not give me any options. This is why a lot of games that were considered WoW clones got looked so negative against, because they weren't real like World of Warcraft clones, because at least in World of Warcraft up until Legion, or even before that, when they incorporated the new path trait system, you had variety. Now you don't. Now you're limited to 3 selections. And those 3 selections restrict what weapon types you can use. So it really changes the demographics of the gameplay. And it changes how you experience the game. And that limit on players makes them not want to play it because it doesn't give them the variety they had before. If Elder Scrolls was to take away all the diversity that it allows, they would be ruining their own game. It'd be like if Guild Wars 2 all of a sudden put a trinity in their game and made it required for all content. That would ruin that game hardcore. That game would be empty of players in about a week's time. The same thing would happen to Elder Scrolls. You guys ever wonder why they made one Tamriel the way they did? Because they knew that the only way they could reach their true, loyal Elder Scrolls fans was by opening the game up to be an Elder Scrolls game. That's 13 plus million players. Now, do you ever wonder why this game is growing so much? It's because those Elder Scrolls players are starting to see more and more this game become an Elder Scrolls game. But they don't play it just because of what you guys consider in-game dungeons and trials. They play it for every other aspect of the game. But they paid for content. And that content is those dungeons and trials. And when they can't get into those dungeons and trials because they're not meeting the standards of the meta, then it makes the game seem like it's useless to them to even play the rest of it, that the only content that's available to them is anything but. That's why the game sees such a flux in the community. That's why the game sees such a diversity in the systems. This is why a lot of people don't get along within the community, is because the Trinity meta, all that kind of play style that creates this separation of the community. I mean, look at what we got going on right now. Even before the 10,000 or 10 million players or 10 million stories event happened, and they had all those loot boxes at the end of the dungeon runs, even before that, we were starting to see a major issue of DPS queuing as tanks and healers, even though they weren't. And they weren't even utilizing abilities that a tank and healer could use. They weren't even equipping a taunt. Even though that's really all they would have had to have done, they weren't doing that. This creates a bigger problem. See, the dungeon system in this game isn't even designed necessarily with the tank, healer, and DPS in mind. It is designed that those are the general things you want to use, but they are not the required things you have to use. The idea of this game's tank, healer, and DPS has been misconstrued, misconcepted, whatever you want to call it. It's been misunderstood. And that has created a huge problem in this game. Because nobody's created anything outside the meta, and those that do get a lot of ridicule for it, which means the more ridicule they get, the more they push themselves into playing the meta, and then the less they like the game, the more likely they are to move on. Now, before you guys ask, have I played the meta? Yes. Do I like it? No. Do I agree with it? No. I think the idea of having good builds is good. Having like the best build for, say, a Templar two-handed tank, offer me it, I'll play it. As soon as it's offered, I'll play it. But nobody's done that. Instead, the only thing we have is the meta. So people like myself and many others are trying to make more variety of builds and offering them to the community outside of the meta, because we know people want that. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I can go into a lot more detail, but there's no reason why. Because it's not going to change anything. It's not going to affect anything. We're still going to have this separation of the community. The only way we can make it better is for people like myself to just keep pushing. And to keep offering more variety of builds to those who want them. Because eventually it'll catch on. And people will see the game for its true design. And instead of looking at the game from a meta perspective, they might actually see that through the perspective of the game itself. Now, I'm not saying either that my idea is right. Because not everyone can play some of these builds. Some of my builds are complicated to people, especially those who are used to a specific. But something they might see in that build might be something they like. And they might like that build once they play it. And once they play it, they like that build, it might change their whole perspective on the game altogether. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I don't want to change people's perspective of the game. I want people's eyes to be open and broadened so they understand there's more to the game than just the meta. I want people to see that there's more to the game than just this dumbed down trinity. And that the trinity expands a lot. But that's pretty much it. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. So, if you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I do want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy will see you in game. Bye.